welcome to this session, and today I want to tell you a few basics about a camera, a DSLR camera. If you have just bought yourself a DSLR camera and you're wondering where to start, today I will tell you a few good things to think about when you begin. And number one is what we call exposure. And exposure is basically how bright or how dark the photo appears after you have taken it. So it might be bright out there, you are shooting under bright sunlight, but you take your photo and you realize your photo is dark. So we can say that that photo is underexposed. It doesn't have the right amount of light. It doesn't matter how much light there is in the environment. We are talking about how much you captured in your photograph, okay? And so that means then that is what we will call exposure in this case. You may be in a very dark place, but according to the settings you have, you can take a photo that is very bright looking, okay? And if it is too bright that you lose out on the details in the photo, that we say the photo is overexposed. In short, it has too much light than it ought to have, okay? And then if you have a photo that has just the right amount of light, we say that photo is well exposed, okay? So that would be very, very critical as you begin out to think about exposure, okay? So it's the very first thing I recommend that you figure out. You think about exposure, okay? So I'll take you through a few basics about exposure, okay? And the first is to talk about ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Those three controls will determine your exposure. And this is how it will all happen. ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor to light, okay? Meaning what? Meaning if you raise the sensitivity of the sensor, then it will sense more light. Regardless of how much light there is, it will capture more of that light. If you lower that sensitivity, it will capture less of that light. And that just means one of the options you have to increase your exposure, it's actually to increase your ISO. If you find you're in a dark place, one of the options you have is to increase your ISO, okay? And number two is the aperture. The aperture is an opening that is in your lens, okay? It's right in your lens, an opening that allows light to pass through the lens all the way to the camera, okay? And logically, it then means it's like a window that is right through. So if you open it wide, it means more light comes in. If you close it very small, it means less light comes in, okay? And that means that is the second option you have to control exposure. So if you're shooting in a dark area, then you may want to open your aperture wide. If you're shooting in a very bright scene, like outdoor when it's sunny, sometimes you may want to close down your aperture a little bit, just not to overexpose your photographs, okay? And the third thing is what we will call shutter speed. A shutter is like a curtain. A shutter is like a curtain you can close and open. If you close the curtain, there is no light that comes in. If you open the curtain, light comes in. So when you talk about shutter speed, you're actually talking about the speed at which the curtain opens and closes. In short, the amount of time that the curtain remains open. So if you open and close very fast, then it means less light comes in. If you open and leave it open for a long time before closing, it means more light comes in. And that becomes the third option that you have to control your exposure. That means if you lower your shutter speed, then you get more exposure. You get more light coming in. If you move it fast, if it's just a small fraction of a second, then it just means that now less light will come into your camera. And those three things are what we call the exposure triangle. And those are the first things that perhaps may really interest somebody to be able to appreciate what we call exposure.